On World News tonight, Halloween crush. A nation in shock after a deadly Halloween disaster in Seoul with more than 150 people killed. Lula victorious. Lula da Silva wins against contender incumbent Jair Bolsonaro in a razor-tight race for Brazil's leadership. Troubled waters. Rescuers struggle to find victims as death toll rises to over 130 in India's Morbi Bridge collapse. And Halloween HALLOWS. Trick-or-treating begins with carved pumpkins and costumes on a spooky Halloween night.
This is Derana World News Tonight. Reporting from Colombo, here's Danilu Witanawasam.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us on World News. Now, following a weekend of tragedy across the globe, varying from stampedes, floods, and even acts of terrorism, we start off tonight's coverage with a look into the calamity that shook South Korea's capital. More than 150 people were killed in a stampede at a Halloween event in central Seoul, with South Korea's president vowing a full investigation in one of the country's worst disasters.
Bodies lined up along a road and dozens of civilians giving CPR, even as music from nearby bars blares out. An evening spent celebrating Halloween in Seoul turned into a night of genuine horror after a large crowd pushed into a narrow, sloped street, crushing people to death.
The incident happened when a large number of people at the Halloween festival fell down, resulting in many deaths.
Some survivors reported the crowd becoming increasingly unruly before the crush, and others said they were trapped for an hour before being rescued. An estimated 100,000 people had flocked to Seoul's Itaewon neighborhood for Halloween celebrations, the first time since 2019, with COVID restrictions on gatherings finally lifted. Following the crash, authorities sent a text message to every mobile phone in the Yongsan district telling people to go home due to an emergency situation near the Hamilton Hotel. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol issued a statement urging a review into the safety of the festivity sites.
Now, shocked by the tragedy in Itaewon, many foreign heads of state, including the Pope, had sent messages of condolences showing their support to the affected and the overall populace of South Korea.
Global leaders sent condolences and words of support for South Korea following a deadly crush disaster at a Halloween event in Itaewon. U.S. President Joe Biden made a written statement on Saturday in which he sent his deepest condolences to the families who lost loved ones. Highlighting the strong alliance between Seoul and Washington, Biden added that the U.S. stands with Korea during this tragic time. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak took to Twitter to say, quote, "All our thoughts are with those currently responding and all Koreans." French President Emmanuel Macron also tweeted that France is by Korea's side after the tragedy in Itaewon. Saying that the events in Seoul come as a shock to all, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said on Twitter that it is a sad day for South Korea. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau also sent his deepest condolences to the people of South Korea and expressed his wishes for a fast and full recovery to those who were injured. During Sunday's Angelus prayer from St. Peter's Square, Pope Francis turned his thoughts to the tragedy in Seoul.
And let us also pray to the risen Lord for those, especially young people, who died tonight in Seoul from the tragic consequences of a sudden crowd crush.
He also emphasized that human life and dignity are the most precious values. Meanwhile, foreign missions in Korea also gave the incident close attention, sharing statements from their own countries as well as emergency hotline numbers.
Now, Lula da Silva is set to become the next president of Brazil after defeating his right-wing rival, incumbent Jair Bolsonaro, by a razor-thin margin in a fiercely contested runoff election. The leftist former leader, widely known as Lula, received more than 60 million votes, the most in Brazilian history, breaking his own record from 2006.
Thousands of people packed the streets of Sao Paulo on Sunday, celebrating the win of President-elect Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. It was a tight and tense runoff vote between the leftist challenger and the right-wing incumbent Jair Bolsonaro. Brazilian TV showed the first images of Lula after declaring his win. Lula won 50.9% of ballots compared with 49.1% for Bolsonaro, according to Brazil's Supreme Electoral Court. The result signaled a rebuke for the fiery far-right populism of Bolsonaro. Some of his supporters cried as the results were confirmed. Lula, a former president who ended 2 terms with record-high popularity and later fought and won corruption claims against him, promised to unite the divided country. In his first speech after the win, Lula said the election victory showed most Brazilians, quote, want more and not less democracy. He acknowledged the tough road ahead, but added, quote, I have faith that with the help of the people, we will find a way out for this country to return to being democratic, peaceful, for us to support parents, families, to build a world that Brazil needs. Lula has vowed a return to state-driven economic growth and social policies that helped lift millions out of poverty when he was president from 2003 to 2010. He also promises to fight destruction of the Amazon rainforest and make Brazil a leader in global climate talks. But in his third term, Lula will confront a sluggish economy and a more hostile legislature, with Bolsonaro's allies holding the largest bloc in Congress. Bolsonaro, who for years has made baseless claims about fraud risks in Brazil's voting system, remains silent initially about the result. 77-year-old Lula's inauguration is scheduled for January the 1st.
Over to the conflict in Ukraine, pro-Ukrainian protests, including those organized by far-right groups, erupted across over Europe as Russia made major advances in its special operation in Ukraine by attacking crucial infrastructure in the country's capital and suburbs.
A show of solidarity with Ukraine, this time from Prague. The sea of demonstrators gathered in the capital of the Czech Republic on Sunday, armed with flags and banners condemning Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Central Balkan country has continuously supplied Kyiv with military equipment and humanitarian aid since Russia's full-scale invasion began more than 8 months ago. The country has also welcomed some 400,000 Ukrainian refugees. This participant says support for Ukraine is absolutely vital because Ukraine won't make it without help. Winter is coming. I think it's right to send weapons and all that over to them, and Putin must lose. The demonstration follows a different rally organised by far-right groups on Friday. They slammed the government for allegedly paying too much attention to the war and for neglecting its own people as soaring inflation and the cost of living crisis continues. But that didn't deter the tens of thousands of anti-war protesters who turned out on Sunday to watch a video message from Ukraine's First Lady, Olena Zelenska. She thanked the crowd for their support and added she hopes Russia's aggression won't succeed.
Now, Western governments have been calling on the Russian Federation to reverse its decision to pull out of an unbrokered grain deal, a move that undermines efforts to ease the global food crisis, with Ukraine saying Moscow had planned the move well in advance.
The European Union called on Russia to reverse its decision to pull out of a UN-brokered grain deal on Sunday, a move that undermined efforts to ease a global food crisis, and that Ukraine said Moscow had planned well in advance. Moscow suspended its participation in the Black Sea deal on Saturday, effectively cutting shipments from Ukraine, one of the world's top grain exporters. It was in response to what Russia called a major Ukrainian drone attack earlier in the day on its fleet near the port of Sevastopol in Russian-annexed Crimea. EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell urged Russia to reverse its decision on Twitter, adding that, quote, Russia's decision to suspend participation in the Black Sea deal puts at risk the main export route of much-needed grain and fertilizers. On Saturday, US President Joe Biden called the move purely outrageous.
It's going to increase starvation. There's no reason for them to do that. But they're always looking for some rationale to be able to say the reason they're doing something outrageous is because the West made them do it.
Russia's defense ministry said Ukraine attacked the fleet with 16 drones early on Saturday, and that British Navy specialists had helped coordinate what it called a terrorist attack. Russia said it repelled the attack, but that the ships targeted were involved in ensuring the grain corridor out of Ukraine's Black Sea ports. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said Moscow used the explosions 137 miles away from the grain corridor as a false pretext for a long-intended move. And President Volodymyr Zelensky called for a strong response from the United Nations and G20.
How can Russia be among others in the G20 if it deliberately works to create famine on several continents? This is nonsense. Russia has no place in the G20.
Russia's departure from the grain deal marks a new development in an 8-month war that began with Russia's invasion in February. The conflict has recently been dominated by a Ukrainian counteroffensive and Russian drone and missile attacks that have destroyed more than 30% of Ukraine's generating capacity and hit populated areas. Each side has accused the other of being prepared to detonate radioactive bombs.
Let's take a short commercial break. More world news on the other side. Welcome back. Now, as Israel goes into another election, Arab-Israeli parties could decide whether Benjamin Netanyahu makes a comeback. Much depends on Palestinian voter turnout.
Palestinian citizens disillusioned with politics could help decide Israel's election next week, when the conservative former premier Benjamin Netanyahu hopes to make a comeback. Arab parties could join an anti-Netanyahu bloc and help defeat him, just a year after one joined an Israeli government for the first time. But Palestinian turnout would need to be high and polls differ. In Nazareth, Sami Abu Shahadeh, lawmaker and leader of Al-Balad party, is on the campaign trail.
We are here visiting our people and families just like we do in other Arab villages and cities. All our meetings turn into festivals because of the crowd. We are feeling the love from our people and we appreciate it. The next phase is to transform this love and crowd into votes at polling stations.
But it's the rise of the United Arab List, known by its Hebrew acronym RAM, that has shifted the debate in Arab-Israeli politics. The Muslim party won 4 lawmakers last year and broke with tradition by joining a coalition government. Arabs account for a fifth of Israelis. Some identify as Palestinian, despite their Israeli citizenship, but others prefer to be called Arab citizens, to emphasize the need for equal rights with Jewish Israelis. With prospects for a Palestinian state dim, the United Arab List has abandoned nationalist rhetoric to focus on fighting organised crime and improving planning and infrastructure in Arab areas. Opinion polls show those are their voters' top concerns. Krami Amir is a supporter.
I believe that this party still works hard and tolerates many things, even though it was accused of treason. This is the only party that cares about its people and their existence in this country, regardless of how they do it. They are being practical and realistic and thinking of new ways to support our people and advance our society.
Opinion polls by the Statnet Research Institute show the party's gamble paid off. More than 70% of eligible Palestinian voters now support an Arab party participating in a coalition. But even with a seat at the table, many Palestinians in Israel say they've lost hope that they can effect change as an Arab minority in a Jewish state.
Over to the Philippines now. Storm Nalgae battered the Philippines after triggering torrential rains that led to deaths of hundreds of people in the southern region of Mindanao. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is said to fly over flood-submerged districts to inspect the damage after the tropical storm Nalgae barreled across the Southeast Asian country over the weekend.
The death toll continued to soar in the Philippines after Storm Nalgae slammed into the country early on Saturday. It triggered flash floods and landslides that killed scores of people, with the country's disaster agency saying the southern provinces suffered the brunt of the impact. Video posted online by the Public Information Office of the Central Gasam municipality showed heavy rains pounding down and powerful winds tearing through the town square. Intensifying into a severe tropical storm, Nalgae was packing maximum sustained winds of 59 miles per hour and whipping up gusts of up to 99 miles an hour when it made landfall in the northeastern Catanduanes Island province. Weather officials warned Nalgae would bring heavy rains over the capital region and nearby provinces as it cut through the main Luzon Island and headed towards the South China Sea. Meanwhile, search and rescue teams continued looking for missing persons on Saturday. They've been plucking residents to safety from chest-deep waters and pulling bodies from thick mud since the storm began unleashing flooding and landslides on Friday. Government officials in the southern Maguindanao province said the rainfall had exceeded expectations. Most of the deaths from the storm have been in the province.
Now, at least 100 people were killed in a twin car bomb at a busy junction in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. And the death toll could rise in the country's deadliest attack since a truck bombing at the same spot 5 years ago killed more than 500 people.
2 car bombs have rocked Somalia's capital, killing at least 100 people and wounding around 300 on Saturday. It happened at a busy junction near key government offices in Mogadishu on a day when the President, Prime Minister and senior officials met to discuss expanding efforts to combat violent extremism. I witnessed the first explosion, then I fled the area. I was in shock because of the first blast. Another explosion rocked the same area. There are deaths and injuries, but I don't know the exact number of the casualties. I was at the attack area when the first explosion went off. After that, I ran away. I saw many dead people. May Allah have mercy on the dead people and help the injured to recuperate. The Al-Qaeda-linked Islamist group Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility. The attack happened at the same place as an Al-Shabaab truck bombing in 2017, which killed more than 500 people.
Now, crossing over to neighbouring India, at least 141 people died when a pedestrian suspension bridge collapsed in India's western state of Gujarat. The bridge in question had been reopened just a week ago after repairs.
The death toll from a bridge collapse in Gujarat in India rose to more than 130. The footbridge was packed with sightseers enjoying holiday festivities when it collapsed on Sunday, plunging people into the river below. Footage showed dozens of people clinging onto the cables and twisted remains of the bridge over the Machu River as emergency teams struggled to rescue them. Some clambered up the broken structure to try to make their way to the riverbanks, while others swam to safety. A number of children were among the victims. Authorities said more than 400 people were on and around the colonial-era suspension bridge at the time of the collapse. The 230-metre bridge was built during British rule in the 19th century. It had been closed for renovation for 6 months and was reopened for the public last week. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who was in his home state Gujarat for a 3-day visit, said he had directed the state chief minister to mobilise teams urgently for the rescue operation. The army has been deployed to help trace missing people and assist in the rescue operations.
Welcome back. For more news, let's take you around the world in a minute. Russia's defense ministry had said on Saturday that British Navy personnel blew up the Nord Stream gas pipelines last month, a claim that London said was false and designed to distract the Russian military failures in Ukraine. However, Britain has denied all allegations. Montenegro's President Milo Djukanovic has expressed his willingness to forge extensive cooperation with China, especially in infrastructure, among other fields. Shanghai's Disney Resort abruptly suspended operations to comply with COVID-19 prevention measures, with all visitors at the time of the announcement directed to stay in the park until they return a negative test for the virus. Top officials from South Korea and the EU met to find ways to boost cooperation. Seoul's Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs met with EU's Deputy Secretary General of External Action Service in the nation's capital. The two promised to strengthen what will be 60 years of diplomatic ties next year. A journalist was crushed to death by a vehicle carrying former Prime Minister Imran Khan in an accident in eastern Pakistan. Khan was leading a convoy along with his supporters towards the capital when the accident happened. That is all from us here at World News Tonight. Join us again tomorrow as we keep you up to date with the latest from around the world. In case you missed any of the stories tonight, you can rewatch the entire program on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/OtherDerana English. We leave you tonight with visuals of nations around the globe celebrating Halloween with spooky parades and carved pumpkins. Have a great night.